South Africa is very beautiful, but its past is dented with and crime. Once upon a time, murderers easily stalked their victims in both busy towns and quiet villages, leaving behind stories that are still scary when heard today. These were not normal crooks. Their names became linked to fear because they were predators. Each had a plan, a method, and darkness hovering around them that turned familiar streets into places to hunt and families into survivors who were mourning. Their names are still in police files and people's minds, serving as a reminder of how dangerous it can be when bad people live in plain sight. In no particular order, these are the darkest villains in South African history. Moses Sithole. Sithole was notorious for telling women to come to him, promising them work, but what they found was unbearable horror. South Africa was still suffering from the chaos of its move to democracy in the early 1990s. There was both hope and panic in the air. The unemployment rate went through the roof, and many women were desperate to find work. In the scariest way possible, Moses Sithole took advantage of that weakness. Sithole was born in Vosloorus in 1964, and his childhood was hard. When he was young, his father died, leaving his mother to raise him and his brothers by herself. Being poor was hard on him, and as he got older, his anger turned into violence. In his 20s, he was found guilty of and sent to jail. He said he was a different person when he got out of jail in 1994, but he had become something much more dangerous. Between 1994 and 1995, Sithole caused a lot of trouble in 3 important places: Atteridgeville, Boksburg, and Cleveland. This is how he got the scary name, the ABC Killer. His way was both dangerous and dishonest. He told unemployed women about job options while pretending to work for a charity. He took them to empty fields once they trusted him. There, he tied them up, and choked them, then threw their bodies away like they were nothing. He had killed at least 38 people and raped more than 40 others in just over a year. When the police put together all of his crimes, they were shocked. People were afraid. Newspapers were full of stories about a predator on the loose, and the cops were under a lot of stress. Sithole was caught in the end when one of the people he was planning to lived and recognized him. His arrest was a relief, but it also showed how bad his crimes were. In 1997, he was given the longest prison term ever, 2,410 years. He wouldn't be able to get out until 930 years had passed. It wasn't just a punishment to lock him up. It was also meant to be a sign that he would never be free again. Cedric Make. Wemmerpan Park in Johannesburg used to be a fun place to hang out where families and couples would walk along the water. But by the middle of the 1990s, fear had spread along its paths. Cedric Make, who was later known as the Wemmerpan Killer, liked to hunt here. Unlike Sithole, whose youth is well known, Make's early life is still mostly a mystery. There is no doubt that by the middle of the 1990s, he had turned to a life of extreme violence. His actions showed that he was more than just a he was also a thief, offender, and a cold opportunist who seemed to enjoy chaos. In 1996 and 1997, Make attacked Johannesburg and caused a lot of damage. Later, police linked him to at least 27, though the real number of people he could be higher. He didn't just do one kind of crime. Before they were some of the victims were hit with clubs or attacked. A lot of these were linked because they happened near Wemmerpan, which is how Make got his notorious name. Ballistic proof helped the police figure it out in the end. Bullets found in Make's matched those found at other crime scenes. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, forensic trends made it clear how brutal he was. When Make went to court, the prosecutors put together an unbelievable case against him. He was charged with over 100 crimes, running from to robbery, and he was finally found guilty of 114 crimes and given several life sentences in prison. It's impossible to say enough about how scary he was for everyone in Johannesburg. People who used to feel safe walking around the city now feel threatened even in public places. Wemmerpan, which used to be a quiet place to escape from reality, became forever linked to his violent rule. Sipho Thwala. Outside of Durban, there are miles and miles of quiet green sugarcane fields that hide more than just tall rows of cane. In the late 1990s, these fields made it hard to see Sipho Thwala's dark work for 2 years. He became known as the Phoenix Strangler. Thwala was born in 1968 and worked as a farmer in Phoenix and its village. He looked like a normal worker who fit in with the daily routine of life in the neighborhood. But hiding behind that was a hunter with a bad plan. He took advantage of people who were out of work, just like Moses Sithole did. To get women to follow him into the dense sugarcane fields, Thwala would offer them jobs. Once inside the tall, empty fields, it was almost impossible to get out. He bound, abused, and his victims there, then hid their bodies among the stalks. Before the cops knew, they had a serial killer on their hands. At least 16 women were and 10 more had been abused. The sugarcane fields, which used to be a sign of farming success, are now a sign of fear and grief. People who lost loved ones said that they thought their loved ones were going to work when they left, but they never came back. The breakthrough happened when survivors bravely told what they had been through. Police were able to find Thwala thanks to the information they gave them. He was arrested in 1997 and went to court 2 years later. The verdict was clear. He would spend 506 years in jail, which is so long that he would never be able to breathe freely again. Thwala did more than just people. He broke people's trust and took advantage of their desperate need for money, which hurt people and left communities scarred. The sugarcane fields of Phoenix told their secrets, and the echoes of South Africa's most dangerous crooks kept going around. Each one revealed a darker part of the country's fight against violent crime. Thozamile Taki. Thozamile Taki was born in 1971 in the Eastern Cape and grew up poor. What he did with his life would shock the whole country. From 2007 to 2009, he carefully preyed on young women who were looking for work. Many were between the ages of 18 and 25 and were swayed by false job offers. They didn't find hope, they found tragedy. Later, their bodies were found in the creepiest places, buried deep in KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape's sugarcane fields and tea farms. It was a sad trend that showed how far Taki would go to take advantage of people's dreams. When the police finally put together all of his crimes, they found out that 13 women had been brutally killed. People all over the country were shocked when he was put on trial. South Africans watched as the shocking evidence was shown in court, while the families of the demanded answers. In 2011, fairness was done. Taki was given one of the harshest sentences in modern South African history. 13 life sentences plus an extra 208 years in prison, after being found guilty of all 13. The case showed more than just how violent one man was. It brought up important issues like poverty, unemployment in rural areas, and the abuse of women looking for work. Not only did the sugarcane hurt families, but he also hurt whole farming towns that had no idea their fields would become graveyards. But while Taki's story was scary, the next criminal was even more violent. So much so that he openly said he was like one of history's most famous. Jack Mogul. Jack Mogale lived on fear, while Thozamile Taki took advantage of hope. Mogale people on the streets of Gauteng between 2008 and 2009. He left a trail of fear, which is how he got the name, the West End serial killer. He went even further and called himself Jack the Ripper of South Africa. His sins were so big and so cruel that they shocked everyone. Mogale was found guilty of 16 people, assaulting 19, and kidnapping 9. His crime spree destroyed the lives of many families. His victims were mostly women who were in weak positions when he attacked them. He often killed them and dumped their bodies in remote places, leaving sometimes horrifying proof of how violent he was. Not only was he very violent, but he was also very mobile, which made him even more dangerous. He struck in different parts of Gauteng, blending in with the locals. As police tried to figure out his routine, he stayed a ghost for months until technology turned against him. Investigators were able to connect Mogale's cell phone information to more than one victim. His arrest was made possible by that digital footprint and other forensic proof. The trial showed how horrible his actions really were by using testimony from witnesses and proof of his cold, calculated methods. Lazarus Mazingane. Around the middle of the 1990s, there was a lot of fear in Pretoria and the surrounding areas. You shouldn't take rides from strangers. And taxis, which are usually a lifeline for workers, became signs of danger. Lazarus Mazingane, who became known as the Highway was the person who made people afraid. Being a cab driver gave Mazingane a lot of trust, which he used to get women to go on rides that seemed normal, but he wasn't like other drivers when he was behind the wheel. At least 14 women were abused, murdered, or robbed by him between 1995 and 1998. He caused a reign of fear that upset people in Gauteng. His method was both scary and dishonest. He would offer rides to women, and then attack them when they were alone, strangling them, and leaving their bodies on roads. A lot of people started to think of the roads as grounds, where something dangerous was always around the corner. Mazingane stayed out of trouble for years, Because he knew the lines well and could blend in with the regular people who used public transportation, he was almost impossible to see. But science caught up with him in the end. He was definitively linked to multiple by DNA evidence, which broke down the facade of anonymity he had carefully built. He was given a life term when he was finally caught and found guilty, but the harm was already done. His crimes cast a long shadow over Gauteng's taxi industry, making people even less trusting at a time when many people depended on taxis for daily needs. Norman Afzal Simons. Simons seemed like the kind of man that parents would never think was up to no good. He was smart, spoke softly, and walked with the confidence of a first-grade teacher. But there was something much darker going on behind that decent front. At least 22 boys went missing near Cape Flats train stops between 1986 and 1994. They were lulled away, and later, their bodies, often suffocated, were found in beaches. Cape Town was filled with fear. Parents walked their kids to school, and neighborhoods kept an eye on the streets, but the kept happening. In 1994, when 10-year-old Elroy Van Rooyen was found, things began to change. Someone caught Simons and put him on trial. Even though the state thought he was involved in all of the he was only found guilty of Elroy. He was given a life term in prison. People in South Africa have been upset for decades about the other boy's lack of justice. Families of the victims are still sure that Simons more people than the courts could show. Many people still think that the station strangler all 22 people, but there isn't enough evidence to prove it for sure. Beyond numbers, the fear he caused went beyond facts. The case left a deep mark on the Cape Flats, making people deeply suspicious and robbing parents of any sense that their children were ever truly safe. While Simons was in jail, though, a much scarier attacker was about to be caught in Port Elizabeth. Stuart Wilkin. If Norman Afzal Simons preyed on children, then Stuart Wilkin was the epitome of pure evil. Wilkin was born in Port Elizabeth in 1966 and had a hard life as a child. Unlike many poor people, though, he went down a violent road that shocked even experienced detectives. Wilkin went after sex workers, children, and sometimes even people close to him. He was known as Brother Boer or the Bodie Boer. His double life was scary. He seemed to fit in with his community, but when he wasn't around other people, he had violent dreams that he would carry out with brutal accuracy. By the middle of the 1990s, Wilkin's crimes were getting worse. He was arrested in 1997, and when he was questioned, he told detectives things that shocked them. 7 people, including his own daughter, were he said. The news shocked the whole country, not only with the number of crimes he had committed but their gravity. At his trial, the authorities showed a disturbing pattern of and incest. Wilkin didn't feel sorry for any of the people he hurt. The only thing he regretted was getting caught. He was given 7 life terms, which means he will never be free again. Wilkin, adults, children, strangers, and even family members. This is different from many serial who only one type of person. His crimes showed holes in South Africa's social structure. They showed how the abused and neglected, like sex workers and street kids, often went missing without anyone noticing until an attacker made everyone look. There are scars on the minds of South Africans and on the families of those he made the country face a scary truth. Evil doesn't always live in the shadows of strangers, but in the close, trusted group of family. Still, Wilkin's confessions don't make the scary secret of another predator easier to take. There was a man who disappeared with 6 young girls, leaving only questions. Gert Van Rooyen. In the late 1980s, South Africa was already on edge because kids were going missing. But soon enough, the name Gert Van Rooyen would be linked to horror and unsolved secrets. As a former helper, Van Rooyen didn't seem like anything special. He looked normal, but he had a relationship with his lover Joey Harhoff that would become a part of South African history forever. Between 1988 and 1989, they took at least 6 young girls hostage. The kids who were bright and hopeful, were last seen getting into Van Rooyen's car. They were never found again. Parents were desperate to find out what happened and put up missing signs all over the neighborhood. The police started one of the biggest manhunts of the time, but the suspect always seemed to disappear. People saw Van Rooyen and Harhoff with young girls, but the case ended tragically before the police could get close. While being chased by police in 1990, Van Rooyen and Harhoff themselves. This violent act put an end to their stories and kept families from knowing the truth. The fate of the missing girls is still one of South Africa's biggest unsolved riddles, because no one has confessed or found their bodies. Not only did Van Rooyen's acts cause pain, but they also led to changes that made the world a better place. People became much more concerned about kid safety after his case, and police had to change how they looked for missing children. But for the parents of those 6 girls, there was no ending. They were stuck in a nightmare that would never end. South Africans still feel scared and angry when they talk about Gert Van Rooyen. That's not all of his story. It's also about the silence that followed, leaving 6 families without answers and a country with problems that might never be fixed. Bulelani Mabhai. There was once a heavy silence at night in the small town of Tuleni in the Eastern Cape that made you feel like you could not breathe. But from 2007 to 2012, screams broke the silence as one man changed the countryside into his own hunting ground. He was a farm worker by day and a monster at night who preyed on women and children. His name was Bulelani Mabhai. Axes, pangas, and an unimaginable amount of violence were what Mabhai used to sneak into homes at night. He broke into homes while people were sleeping and whole families while they were in their beds. At least 20 people, from old women to young children, were killed in one of the most shocking country sprees South Africa had ever seen. People in the village were so scared that they left their homes at night and went to nearby police stations or crowded into cousins' homes to sleep because they were too afraid to sleep alone. Tuleni used to be just a farming town, but it became famous for having a ghost that haunts the area. The police tried for years to find him, but failed. But DNA evidence finally broke the case open by connecting him to more than one. When he went to court, the truth was almost too painful to hear. After the victim was named, Mabhai didn't feel bad about what he did. In 2013, he was given several life sentences, which meant he would never be free again. But his crimes left wounds that could not be healed by jail time. People still remember Tuleni not for its farms, but as the place where the monster used to rule. Simon Majola, Themba Nkosi. At the turn of the century, Johannesburg had its own nightmare, while Mabhai terrorized a town in the country. Before, Bruma Lake was a famous place for families and tourists. But then, 2 men named Simon Majola and Themba Nkosi several people there. Between 2000 and 2001, they used a terrifyingly planned way to hunt men who weren't paying attention. Making friends with their targets gave them a false sense of security, which they then used to force them into the muddy water of Bruma Lake. When they got inside, they were tied down and their last breaths were taken under the water, in a place that should have been a place of relaxation. At least 8 men were this way, and their deaths were first thought to be accidents. But it wasn't long before the trend was clear. Lost wallets and other things were common, and the number of drownings was too high for it to be a chance. The so-called Bruma Lake turned a park in Johannesburg into a graveyard in the water. The city could finally breathe again after Majola and Nkosi were caught, but the damage had already been done. Families that used to have picnics by the lake stopped going there, and the once bustling tourist spot started to lose its popularity. Even as the horrible details of their crimes were told in court, the men didn't show much remorse during their trial. Both were given life sentences, which means they will spend the rest of their lives in jail. Still, the families of those who still remember how terrible those days by the lake were. Daisy de Melker. In South Africa, one of the most feared was a woman whose weapon of choice was poison, long before names like Mabhai or Majola became linked to fear. Daisy de Melker was her name, and she was the first black widow in the country. Daisy was born in 1886 and worked as a nurse in Johannesburg. From the outside, she looked like a decent woman who was working hard to make a living. But there was a dangerous goal hidden beneath the surface. Danger doesn't have to be hidden. Sometimes it hides behind a smile. Daisy's story would show that. Daisy's first husband died suddenly, leaving her a large insurance payout. There were more rumors of foul play after the death of her second husband, which also happened in a strange way, and was followed by a large financial gain. But it wasn't until something bad happened close to home that her true nature became clear. Arsenic was added to Daisy's son Rhodes Cowell's coffee, and he died in 1932. Soon, the police realized that both of her husbands had been poisoned. Forensic tests proved what many people had thought for a long time. Daisy had carefully planned each death and used her medical knowledge to give lethal doses that were not found for years. Her case was one of the most famous in South African history. Every detail was written about in the news, which made her look like a cold, calculating woman who for money. The public was both shocked and morbidly interested. South Africa's history of crime leaves scars, but it also shows resilience, reminders that even in darkness, truth eventually surfaces and justice takes its stand. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.